Welcome back to another episode of 10-Minute Mood. Today's episode is focused on emotions. Emotions can seem like a pretty straightforward concept, but what I've found in my work is that there is a lot of confusion out there about what an emotion is. What makes up an emotion? How clear are you about the emotions you're experiencing? Hopefully, after today's episode, you will be clearer on what makes up an emotion. Emotions are complex. They're not some straightforward thing. Even though we might use one word to describe them, anger, guilt, grief, happiness, they're actually made up of three different parts, a bit like a triangle having three different sides to it. We usually find it easier to experience some of those parts or sides and more challenging to experience one or more of those. So let's break it down. So first of all, there is a physiological sensation. Emotions aren't just in our heads. They're felt in our bodies. From the fluttering of butterflies in our stomach to a tingling sensation of pleasure, our bodies tell us a lot about our emotional state. So that's the physiological sensation. It's the stuff we feel in our body that we then put a label to as a particular emotion. The second part is the action impulse. This part doesn't get as much airtime, and for many people, they don't associate this with an emotion. But every emotion comes with an urge or an impulse to act in a particular way. It's actually part of the whole point of the emotional system. If you think about the word emotion, it's emote, the motivation. It's a body-based physiological signal motivating towards action of some kind. That's not the same thing as saying that we have no choice over whether or not to follow that impulse. It's not the same thing as saying that opening ourselves up to noticing the physiological sensation inside will then necessarily lead us to do the associated action impulse. It's just about recognizing that an emotion comes with physiological sensation in the body and an action impulse. It's a little nudge towards a specific kind of action that if this emotion just took you over, it might want you to do. Whether it's the impulse to run, to seek out a hug, to fight, to reach out and repair damage done to a relationship, to cry. Our emotions are hardwired to push us towards a specific set of actions. And that's why we call them emotions. They are designed to create motion, to motivate, and lead to action of some particular kind. But again, this doesn't mean we have to follow the lead of that impulse. It's really important to bear that in mind. But it can be important to notice that there is this impulse, at least as a starting point. So there's physiological sensation, some kind of action impulse, and then the third part is a cognitive understanding. So this is where the mind comes online. So we put a label on what we're feeling. We put a label on our emotions. So this is joy. I am frustrated. I feel sad. This is our cognitive understanding of the physiological sensation and the action impulse taken together. And we often have a whole set of associated thoughts that then come with a given emotion. Our thinking mind gives shape and meaning to the otherwise wordless sort of swirling sea of emotions within us. It can help us to make sense of and to order how this internal experience fits into our daily life. What is it telling us about our relationships or this moment or how I might want to act? So that's the cognitive understanding piece. We can think about that either as just the label we give, the name that we give to an emotion, or the associated thoughts that go with that label. So those are the three parts of the triangle, if you like, when we think about an emotion. So sensations in the body, some associated impulse or urge to act in a particular way, and a cognitive understanding, a label, a name for this emotion, making meaning out of what it's telling us. So when we talk about things like emotional intelligence or connecting to our emotions, we mean taking the time to stop and notice all three of those aspects. If we slow down and try to tune into the feeling inside and those different parts of it, it's quite often the case that we then increase our ability to be able to tolerate, to hold the feeling, and to manage what can sometimes feel like a roller coaster of emotions, or what can feel like an overwhelming sensation or a compulsive need to act in a particular way. To just slow down and try and notice there's a sensation in my body, there's an associated urge to act in a particular way. I think this feeling is whatever. Just stopping and noticing all three sides of that. In doing that, emotions can become less scary, and we learn that we can make space inside for all of that before we even get to the point of deciding how we are truly going to act in the world. So even the stuff that is confronting or painful to look at, by increasing the time that we stop and pay attention to it before we even act at all, we slowly start to become more acquainted with our emotions. We build up our ability to notice that we actually can sit with those feelings for longer than we might think, and that these feelings don't have to overtake our actions quickly, that we can notice that they might want to do something and still choose not to do that thing. And they can give us important information about what is happening that we might otherwise miss if we move too quickly and fall into our usual habits and stories about what we do when a particular feeling shows up in a particular relationship. A good example of this would be something like anger. To notice an angry feeling inside when you are relating to someone who you love very much, for many people, can quickly lead to a desire to squash that feeling down, or to feel ashamed of oneself, turn the anger back in on oneself, give ourselves a hard time in our head around, how could I feel that way towards someone who is so loving towards me? And all these stories we might then tell ourselves about what that means about who we are as a person. And we can often shrink away in that moment and start to feel really bad about ourselves. Instead, noticing, in this instance, anger as a hardwired primal signal that perhaps something that this person is doing right now, even though I also love them very much, and I can understand they love me very much, perhaps something they're doing right now is not quite right by me. Perhaps I'm experiencing some kind of injustice here, or something that I might like to try and remedy with this person. Seeing it as information. And you can see how that would be very different to potentially the impulse that might go with anger. Because emotions are very primal, they're pretty crude in what they want us to do. They don't come with a nuanced profile of potential actions. The urges are usually pretty basic. And what I mean by that is, with anger, it's quite often the case that once you tune into it, you can notice inside yourself that if the emotion were allowed to just go unchecked, it's quite often the case with anger that the action impulse would be an aggressive action to reach out and either hurt another person, push another person away, rectify a situation in a more aggressive manner. What usually happens is that we don't like to look at that inside ourselves. We don't like to notice those more primal, basic, hardwired aspects of our internal experience. And so there's lots of ways that we avoid noticing that part of an emotion. Building up the profile of an emotion inside and understanding its complexity and its fullness actually allows a moment to reflect on how we truly want to act in this moment. And it's often the case that that is different to the more basic urge that comes with the feeling. And that's a wonderful thing, because that is showing us that we are more than just our emotions. We are more than what our emotional center might want us to do. But that's not the same thing as saying that we should try to pretend that the emotional center doesn't exist, that we should not take it into account in any manner, that it just gets in the way of things. Because actually there is a lot of important information, there are important signals in that system that are trying to give us information about things that we might not otherwise be picking up if we are only paying attention in a very cerebral, thinking, intelligent kind of way. So I hope that makes some sense. The idea here simply is that our emotions are more complex than we often give them credit. Actually stopping and allowing ourselves to get in touch with an emotion in more depth. And we can do that by trying to consider these three different parts of the emotion. But taking that time to do that allows us a little pause so that we don't act quickly. It gives us some time to consider our action, and it allows us to take into account signals from our emotional mind that can also be telling us really important things about what is happening right now and how that impacts what matters to us, how that impacts our autonomy, how that impacts our ability to be connected to others, how that impacts what we believe morally and ethically. It is important information, but we take it into account alongside higher level thinking, which can help us to shape how we might bring that information into our actions. In future episodes, I will dive into a particular emotion in more depth to really illustrate what I'm talking about here. If you've found this helpful, if you would like some extra support to consider your emotions and the way that they might motivate your actions in the world, please get in touch with us today at Sydney City Psychology. We have a wonderful group of psychologists who provide sessions online and in the Sydney CBD. I look forward to talking with you next time.